Today, we are talking to Mímir Kristjánsson, a Norwegian MP for the Socialist Party Rødt, or simply Red. Mímir is of Icelandic descent, but has lived in Norway his whole life. In this conversation, we are going to talk far and wide about socialism. What is socialism? How do we get there? The role of socialistic parties within the capitalistic democratic system, the role of trade unions, and whatever else might come up. First, a little introduction is in order. This talk is the first, hopefully, in a series about socialism in the world and its prospects. The series is organized by Sosialista Flokkur Íslands, or the Icelandic Socialistic Party, and the respondents will be a number of people from different corners of the world who have been engaged in political struggle for socialism. Hopefully, this series will give some interesting insights into the political struggle for socialism today, its obstacles and possibilities. My name is Páll Hannesson. I live in Norway, and I am currently the leader of a small local Red group in the municipality of Sunnfjord. Mímir, you are now a newly elected member of Stortinget, the Norwegian parliament for the party Rødt. Can you give us a brief account of your journey into politics and why you ended up with Rødt?
Yes, I'm not really able to say when it began. Both my parents are political people and placed on the left of politics. But I entered politics actually as a member of the Norwegian Social Democratic Party, Arbeiderpartiet, and their youth organization, and was the leader of the local chapter for AUF, which is called, the youth organization in Stavanger. But then the world changed a bit during my year in high school, during my years in high school, with the war on Iraq, struggles to stop the war in Iraq, and I was radicalized and became a member of Red Youth, which is Rødt's youth party. And then I stopped in politics and worked as a journalist for some years, and then I returned before this, not this election, but the local elections 2 years ago.
Right. Now, the party had for a long time only one member in the parliament, but after the election last year, the number swung up to 8. This obviously gives Red a more leverage in the parliament, but how would you define the role of a socialist party as Rødt in Norwegian society today?
I think Rødt's role in Norway has been increasingly the last years to become a new workers' party. In Norway, the Labour Party, Arbeiderpartiet, has been sort of the monopolist of the trade unions, of the working class. But for a long time, they've adopted neoliberal policies, have moved to the right, and so on. And Rødt has now become a challenger for domination of the working class field of politics. So the growth of the Red Party in Norway is very closely associated with becoming a new workers' party to rival the traditional social democratic one. As for the struggle for socialism, there is always this big dilemma for every radical party of any kind, but socialist parties also, that you both have to exist in the world that you live in and to fight the struggles that go on in the world you live in. It's 1 kroner more in wage each hour, and at the same time you have to be able to point towards more radical changes in society. And the Red Party has obviously now had parliamentary success, at least to some degree, but at the same time, it's very important for us to continue to strengthen our hold of both the labor unions, which are the biggest people's movement in Norway by far, but also more what you could say ad hoc popular movements, popular fronts. Now, for instance, there is a big crisis in Norway with the prices on electricity, and hundreds of thousands of people are engaging themselves in different ways because they are concerned that they won't be able to pay their bills. And it's important for the Red Party to be an ally of this kind of popular movement and to have a popular base outside the parliamentary outside our parliamentary base. That means that we are able to if everything goes well, to have bigger impact than our 8 representatives and 4.7% of the vote should say.
Okay. We will go deeper into this issue as time goes by. But if we expand the question and add some historical framework, Red descends from AKP, or Arbeidernes Communist Party, the Workers' Communist Party, which was active from 1973 until formally it was put to rest in 2007. This party, which based its politics both on China and Albania, was particularly successful in Norway compared to many radical left-wing parties in Europe. The members later submerged into Rødt Valgallians or Red Voters Coalition, RV, which was the direct precursor for Rødt, which was established as a party in 2007. Now, both forerunners for Rødt describe themselves as communist parties and as revolutionary parties. Today, Rødt prefers to call itself a socialist party, and there has been a heated debate whether the party wants to refer to Marx or Marxism in its platform or not. This is a crucial distinction. How would you define the difference and the relevance of whether a party defines itself as a communist or a socialist?
I think that, first of all, I think that this Rødt has had severe problems often with the heritage of the AKP movement of the 70s and the Maoist movement of the 70s, which is, as you're correct, the precursor of the Red Party. And it's not simply a question of communism, not communism. It's also a question of what kind of communism and the brand of communism that the forerunners of Rødt practiced or believed in Norway in the 70s was not the right way to go because it was there were severe political mistakes in the discussions about democracy and dictatorship in the support of both the Stalinism of the Soviet Union and the Maoism of China. But all that is buried. So the discussions about that are finished in the Red Party, and they don't actually exist in any way anymore. So that kind of AKP style 70s Maoism is a part of the Red Party's history and not a part of our present or our future. And the question about the bigger question for the future is what is the relationship between communism, socialism, between a revolutionary and reformist strategy. Myself, I grew up with the two parents that would call themselves communists. I don't really have a problem personally with calling myself a communist, but it's also I also have my own understanding of what that word means, my own understanding of what the ideological basis of communism is, the communism of Marx, that it is a democratic movement, that it is a movement about emancipation of the workers, that it's not the type of dictatorship of the Soviet Union or the Eastern Bloc. While a lot of regular people and ordinary working class people, not least, see communism as a synonym of the East Bloc type of society. So in part, this is a discussion about what words do you use, what words are practical to use if you want to gather support for radical policies. What words are the ones that will scare people away with no apparent reason? What kind of ideological heritage is necessary to have to secure that you make the right decisions and so on? But I would say that the Red Party today is a radical socialist party. It's not a communist party in the traditional sense of the word. It works for a drastic change away from capitalist society and into socialist society. We're a revolutionary party in the sense that we want a political revolution or a big change in the way society is. We want to get rid of the division of production between the owners and the laborers, all these things. So I would say we are a Marxist party, for instance. I don't think that's controversial either. But at the same time, I would say that the Red Party is, it's not a traditional communist party with these top-down control, with this type of party structure that has been typical of the communist parties of old, and this kind of Kader party, it's called in Norwegian. I'm not really sure what it's called in English, and these type of things. So I would say that we belong to a radical socialist tradition. A lot of people in Norway, and it's often used as a slander on us, use the word leftist populism to brand Rødt. It's meant as a bad thing. I'm not sure it's really a bad thing, but it's meant as that. And I would say if you want to compare it to something, I would say that you should compare it to Syriza in Greece before they became a government party, Podemos, La France Insoumise in France, the Sanders movement, obviously the Momentum part of the Corbyn movement. It's these kind of new radical socialist parties built on communist heritage, but with a different view on strategy and also on democracy and I would say liberal rights compared to the 70s and at least to the 30s.
Okay, so you've gone some way to define socialism, but the question is it achievable for a party like Rødt by participating in the liberal democratic political system we find ourselves today? Or will indeed the party like Rødt compete on the populist axis with by wording the demands of the people on the street, so to speak, whatever it might be? What is the axis here? What is the core?
I would draw on the work of the Polish-German revolutionary Rosa Luxemburg in this regard. One of her central ideas is that there is no actually contradiction between reform and revolution. On the contrary, Luxemburg believes that revolutionary ideas are necessary to complete reforms, and reforms are necessary to lead up to a revolutionary change in society. And this is easy to say in theory, it's more difficult to do in practice, but the theoretical idea, at least, of the Red Party is that by strengthening the power base of the working class and their allies in capitalist society, you will be able to point in a revolutionary direction, in a socialist direction. For instance, in this concrete discussion about electricity prices now in Norway, the obvious problem, the reason the electricity prices are so high, is because we have a free market of electricity. So the Red Party is all the time working, not just to argue about how much do you pay each month, but to also have an ideological debate about, do we want a free market of electricity, or is electricity a necessity that everyone in society should be supplied by the state for a reasonable price? And our job is to both be a part of the big malcontent and anger that people of all kinds, all colors, are now feeling because they have bills that are 3 and 4 times as much as the same time last year. But in addition to this, our job is to move a lot of those people towards more radical and more socialist policies, to see that the causes of these problems are not just some unlucky fluke, bad weather, or stupid politicians, but it's a system failure within the capitalist society. So the dilemma for the Red Party is always that if you're a socialist or even a communist party, or you could call it whatever you want, if you're not able to offer regular working class people anything in the present, just some kind of vision idea about utopian society somewhere in the future, then you will have no chance of success and you will not be a party of the working class in any way. But and at the same time, if you have no idea of utopian society you want, then you will just be swept away by capitalism like the social democratic parties are. So if you have no vision of classless society or that type of thing, then you will have no chance in implementing reforms. You will have no chance of standing up to the market powers. You will have no chance to challenge the ruling classes. But you need to combine these two. So you need to work on finding the basis of small improvements, but at the same time keeping this goal so that you understand which direction the small improvements are moving in, and to use these fights for small improvements to strengthen the position to make the big and radical changes in a longer term.
Right. Okay. If we look at the tradition of Marxism and Marxist parties and Marxist theory, we find key concepts such as class struggle, class consciousness, alienation, exploitation, and such. Today, these concepts are, well, they're not very apparent in the debate. Today, Rødt frames its main strategy as to combat the differences that exist between people in capitalist society, rather than to uproot capitalism. What would be would that be a fair comment to make? Or what is your comment?
Yeah, in part, it's a fair comment to make. First of all, I think that the Red Party is the party in Norway that's most concerned with class issues, and we also have becoming a workers' party has obviously been a strategic goal, and it's been articulated as a big strategic goal of the entire party. So we want to become a new workers' party, which is the way to say it, and that's been an important part of that. At the same time, I understand sort of I agree with the idea that we are discussing in inequality and differences, social differences in society. This is the words the debate is framed in today. And there is obviously a danger in this, because it gives some sort of impression that if you just had an equal capitalism, then things would be very okay. And of course, there are problems inherent in the system that aren't solved without solving the obvious power problem of someone owning and the many not owning anything at all. So it's obviously a challenge for the Red Party to be able to at the same time participate in discussions about inequality, social injustices, try to gather voters, but also try to move people forward in the right direction through those debates, but at the same time not losing sight of what is actually the problem at hand there, which is, of course, is capitalism in its form. So it's a difficult question to sort of say yes or no. I don't think it's a good solution for a socialist party to say we're not interested in inequality. We just want to discuss capitalism. But I think on the other hand, if you just there are every political party in Norway claims to be against inequality. There is not a single political party claiming to be in favor of economic inequality. So that's not a very radical viewpoint, actually. So you have to try to move these strategic debates forward in some way. And then I would say that we have one big advantage in the Scandinavian countries. I'm not actually sure if Iceland has the same advantage. I actually don't think so. But in the Scandinavian countries, the welfare state, a lot of the social democratic control of capitalism, which people remember very fondly and which they love very much and which they have huge respect for, was fought by people that claim to be socialists, claim to be communists, claim to be revolutionaries. So that looking back in our own close history, ideas that today are branded as crazy communist ideas were actually totally regular ideas in Norway in the 1970s or the 1950s. And that's everything from discussion about bank reform, socializing banks, to discussion about who is owning the natural resources, shouldn't that be the state, all these kinds of things. So this is a big advantage in trying to, in my view, forward the cause of socialism in Norway, is to try and politicize again this heritage from the old labor movement, which has been forgotten by very many for a long time, and using it for a radical means in transforming society. So this is our sort of this is the way, I think, to bring concepts like class consciousness, class struggle into the political debate again. Is one of the ways to do that is by calling on our own very strong heritage for class struggle and class consciousness in Norway, as we also have in Sweden and Denmark too. While in Iceland, it's probably, isn't it, Sjálvstæðisflokkurinn, which has been the leading party. So the history is a bit different, and there's a little less industry and such of old. So you have a little less of the same type of things that we have in the Scandinavian countries.
Yeah, indeed. The Conservative Party in the 60s, they had their slogan was class by class, or class with class. So at that time, concepts like class were used. But is there a danger if you cut the line between this Marxist ideology and phraseology and so on in your day-to-day politics, that you end up being, well, the most radical party on the social democratic spectrum? I mean, you just go a little bit further than the Arbeiderparti in your demands, but basically you are living in a symbiosis within the system. How do you break out of that?
Yeah, that's obviously a risk, and in part it's something that that problem exists, I think, for almost every single socialist party in Europe and in the capitalist system of the West, almost without exceptions, because at the point being there is of course great social unrest in Europe and the West. There is, but mostly it's a defensive struggle against the excesses of capitalism that's going on. It's not a revolutionary situation in the sense that there is a big popular demand. There's a big popular demand for something, but it's not really clear if there's a big popular demand for instance, socialism. So that's probably what every single political party of the left in the Western world is probably now in the situation where you are part in symbiosis, as you're saying, with a system that's failing, and you're trying to correct the most cruel injustices of this system while the world is moving in the wrong direction. So the question is, how can you break out of it? And the obvious one obvious thing is that you have to have a ideological and Marxist theoretical basis of what you're doing. If you don't have that, then you will be swept away instantly by the popular demands by the media, by the popular demands of people, by the forces of capitalism, and that's typical what's happened to social democratic parties. They've systematically built down any kind of ideological sort of anchor point, and obviously are just floating in any direction that happens to now it's probably in Norway a leftist movement in the population. So the Social Democratic Party has been rather leftist the last year, and then you will have maybe a right wind blowing, and then the Social Democratic Party will move to the right. So this is sort of the thing to avoid. And then it's also necessary to understand that we need to make radical, realistic propositions. There are two big traps here. The first one is that you can make radical propositions that have no chance whatsoever of gathering support of anyone, except outside the party building. And if you do that, then you are just as you're not dangerous at all for the capitalist power of society. So if you only have a lot of radical ideas and you have no strategy or way of gathering support for these ideas, then you, in practice, are not contributing anything to class struggle. And this is actually the history of both AKP and the first years of the Red Party, with, of course, a few honorable exceptions in local municipalities and in the labor unions and whatever. But the problem was that the party was not able to gather any form of popular support for its policies, and by not being able to do that, also failing in its task to be a true radical force in society, and instead also become just some kind of spice in the political discussion, someone saying something funny once in a while, some kind of circus act in the bourgeois circus. So this is the one trap. And the second trap is just forgetting all your principles, your ideological base, everything. So you have to renew all the time this sort of realistic, radical proposals that are able to move people in the correct direction, to wake their class consciousness, to build alliances with the working class and their allies, to be able to strengthen the popular forces in society, so that you're able to mount an even greater sort of attack on capitalism at the next turn point.
Some would maybe debate that or argue that curbing the excesses of the capitalist system is only to prolong its life. But let's stress that. If we look at the state, the role of the state has been for a long time debated among left-wing radicals. On one hand, it is viewed as a part of, if not indeed the guardian of the capitalist system. And on the other hand, socialists are fighting against privatizations of the state functions which are for the common good, the welfare system, water, health, and so on. How are socialists today to tackle the idea of the state? How do we bring that into the politics? Is it necessary? Is it important?
Yes, I think that the old, more simplistic idea that the state is just a tool in the hand of the ruling class, I believe that it's too simplistic, and it's at least partly wrong, because the way the state has developed in countries with democratic rights, with votes, with political parties, with free elections, the state is obviously a battleground between different classes. So there are parts of the state in Norway, parts of the legislation in Norway, the laws, that are very, very good for the working class and very bad for the ruling classes. And there are obviously parts of the laws in Norway and parts of the state that obviously have the opposite agenda. So it's very difficult to say something just the state good or bad. It's obviously something that's possible to use in some way or another. And it reflects on the strengths of the different class interests in society. So for instance, we have in Norway, it's the typical thing is that the state used to be better than it is. So a lot of things were better before, when you had stronger working class movements in the 60s, 70s, and it's weaker now. Or it's not weaker, because that's a classic neoliberal mistake, saying that sort of the right wants a weak state and the left wants a strong state. The right wants a strong state, obviously, to stop any kind of messing about with capitalism. So it's not a question of that. And the right, the capitalist class want to have buyouts and crisis packages and all kinds of helps from the state when they're in trouble. So every single bank has to be rescued every year by the state. So there's no discussion between the left and the right. It's not, are you for or against the state? It's, what do you want to use the state to do? What are the tasks of the state, and what should the state be used to do? So that's the idea. Is obviously conquering the state in some kind of way, and that's sort of the old idea, of course, as well. It was the revolutionary idea of the 1917 revolution, and it's obviously the idea of our role in democratic elections today. But taking over the state by free elections, winning positions, winning maybe governments, whatever, also holds a big challenge in that the whole apparatus of the state is obviously not neutral, and it's not neutral in any country. It won't be neutral in a socialist society either. So the bureaucrats of the state, the top bureaucrats of the state, they will obviously have their own interests, their own plans, their own worldviews, their own ideas. And in Norway, we see this. I believe that we see now there is a big weakening in Norway over the last decades of popular democracy. Elections in Norway mean less today than they did in 1971. And the reason for that is partly privatization. Market more and more is delegated to the market, but it's also our entering into the European Union, not into the European Union, but the what's it called in English? The European EØS, which is like a European Union light type of union.
The EES, the European Economic Zone, inner market.
Yeah, exactly. So we're a part of the European common market, and we get a lot of directives from Brussels that have never been voted upon by Norwegian voters and so on. And at the same time, you have a bureaucratization of the state. So more and more often, people, honest, good people, social democratic people, or people in the agrarian party now, Senterpartiet, the farmers' party of old, they get elected, they promised a lot of things, they have a majority, and they really want to do it. It's not like they've suddenly become evil or treacherous or just want to throw everything on the boat, but they're sort of stopped by the bureaucracy of their own ministries. And we see this, or if they're not stopped by the bureaucracies, they're stopped by the European Union. So for instance, we've had a railway privatization in Norway. There's a big majority against the railway privatization in Parliament now. It's 100 people of 169 who would vote against any form of railway privatization and who would vote to re-socialize the already privatized railways. But the problem is that the European Union won't allow Norway to re-socialize its railways. That would be in breach with our contracts with the European Union. And so the politicians who have been promising this, they just put up their hands. No, this is not possible. We weren't able to do it anyway. And similar, you have this meeting with the state. You have problems at every single crossroads with a strong bureaucracy, for instance, in the Ministry of Finance and so on, don't want to use money on poor people and so on because it's economic, not so smart in their belief. So we have to have not a naive idea that you just can walk in with, say you get 51% of the vote for the Red Party, and you just walk into every single ministry and you say, we have we have a majority in parliament, we want to do this and this and this and this. It's not that simple. Even then, you will be hindered, you will be entrenched, you will have problems. So you need to have built a sort of counter power outside the state, in the labor unions, in other grassroots movements, in your own party, with your own expertise, your own ideas, your own reforms, because you will meet these kind of hindrances, even though you should be able to win elections.
Yeah, which brings us to the trade unions. The trade unions do exist as a result of class struggle, and are often seen as a vehicle for progressive change. Yet many trade unions carry a mixed baggage and are not very progressive in the politics. Cooperation between LO or TUC and the Federation of Employers seems to be more than accepted. And if we take, for example, the recent coalition between these two parties on the future of the oil industry and the new green economy, which cannot by any means be described as a kind of progressive. And the whole idea is a bit problematic with this cooperation. Now, Red understandably is keen on cooperating with the trade unions and to forge alliances with the trade union movement. Should a socialistic party like Red do that on the premises of the trade union, even if that politics seems to be reactionary? Or how should a socialistic party work up against trade unions? This is...
Yeah, I believe that the trade union is the single most important ally of any socialist party anywhere in the world. And the trade unions are the direct result of the working class organizing itself, fighting the power of the owners. So there is no way to power in any form for a socialist party or a socialist movement without cooperating and forging alliances with the labor unions. And then it's obvious that a lot of the bigger trade unions in Norway, and especially the top levels of the labor unions in Norway, obviously are not voters of the Red Party and have policies that are to our right and have policies that in some questions are wrong. For instance, in my view at least, for instance, in a lot of discussions about the environment. But at the same time, I believe that the common goal of the trade unions and the left, political left, are so obvious, strengthening the power of the workers, and the self-organizing of the workers through the trade unions is so necessary for the left that there is no other way to do anything of note in the world than forging a big cooperation or a big alliance with the labor unions. And then there are a few things to say about that. First of all, there is no reason. The Red Party makes its own policies, and we listen to the labor unions, and we are concerned what the labor unions have to tell us. But it's not like we change our policies because the labor unions want us to change policies. So we have our own policies, and we try to convince people in the labor unions to support these policies. And of course, when we work forging alliances, we look at the similarities. What are we agreeing on? What can we build together, and talk less about the things that we argue about, because we can argue about that with the right as well. So we try to forge alliances on that basis, but we don't change our policies, or we're not dictated by any body outside the Red Party. And the second is that there, of course, inside the labor unions is a big schisma between the people on the top and the average members. So the TUC of Norway has 1 million members of a population of 5 million, and these members are often they can vote for any kind of party, but they're often very radical in policies. They strongly oppose any kind of privatization. They want to tax the rich a lot more than what's discussed in Norway today. They want public control of natural resources. And so on. They want to stop the moving of profitable industries to abroad when that happens, and so on and so on. So we have to cooperate with this grassroots elements of the labor unions. And then you have people in the top levels of the labor unions that have a more loyal relationship to especially the Workers' Party, Arbeiderpartiet, and their policies, and will often defend Arbeiderpartiet, the Workers' Parties, no matter what the policies may be. So our job is to not forge alliances always with these on the top, but trying to activate all this big membership on the grassroots of the labor unions. But just to repeat the opening point, I think there is no single serious socialist party that can exist almost anywhere in the world without having a strong base amongst unionized people and among labor unions in some form.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. I mean, but the if we look back in history, the left-wing radical parties, they had this policy of proletarization, of getting their members into working class jobs if they were not there already, and trying to get influence in the trade unions and such. Do you think that is a viable way to go, or how would we best influence the trade unions into a more progressive left-wing politics?
Yes, I think I think the policy of proletarization is not the most the easiest or best way to go about gaining influence in labor unions, because first of all, I think a lot of people that are working class aren't that enthusiastic about people dressing up like working class people, if you say it that way. And second of all, I think that you won't come any sort of length with this without being able to recruit people directly from the labor unions instead of sort of installing your own people there. So the proletarization campaign of the 70s has done a lot of good things for the Red Party. So it's not, there's no reason to shame it, but I don't think it's a good strategy moving forward. What I believe is necessary now is working consistently to be a party of working class politics, appealing to working class people. And this sounds like just some kind of easy thing to say, but it's rather difficult sometimes in reality. For instance, there is no doubt that the old voter base of the Red Party, people like me, for instance, are people that have entered the party because they were in some kind of a reading circle about Marx and with a background typical from university of some kind. The Red Party has always been strong around the universities and the cities with universities and so on. A lot of very good people, my parents, whatever, but typical teachers, journalists, whatever. And what has happened now with the great growth of the Red Party from 1,700 to over 13,000 members, from 1.2 to 4.7%, is that you're suddenly able to reach out to a whole new group of people. And these are people that have low salaries, people on benefits, elderly, sick people, people that are unemployed. These are a lot of single parents, people working in the industry, people working in the lower paid parts of private sector, and people, of course, working in the public sector, nurses, kindergarten workers, so on. And these groups have now suddenly become available to the Red Party in a totally new way. And this has been possible because we have had a strategy for several years, working relentlessly on that strategy to appeal to working class voters, and not, for instance, running off on the first and best culture war against the right-wing populist party of Norway when they want to, they say something stupid about we have to have Christmas Christmas carols every day in school or something stupid like that. And people in a lot of other leftist parties are no, we have to have this and that and not only Christian society traditions and blah blah blah. The Red Party has tried to steer away from that kind of culture wars and concentrate on what we know that we agree with a broad group of working class voters on, which is, of course, social and economic issues, discussions about control over natural resources, discussions about privatization, discussion about ownership, about salaries and wages, about welfares and benefits, all these type of things. So this has been a strategic work over many, many years, and it took a long time before it made any form of success, but it's now paying off. And we are being able to influence a whole new group of people. And these people, they are often labor union activists. So these people are working class people from before coming into the Red Party because they're sick and tired of the workers' old Arbeiderpartiet being too slow and to the right. And they come into Rødt, and that strengthens Rødt as a labor union party.
Right. On that note, the latest polls show that 7.1% for Rødt. But as Rødt is now in the upswing with the electorate, and many new local chapters or groups have been started in different parts of the country, many of they are fragile with few members, little tradition, and at the same time, now you have a MP group with 8. You have a lot more influx of money into the party. There is a certain risk that this Oslo MP group will be kind of isolated from the rest of the party and will concentrate on issues in the parliament, and you forget what's happening outside. What do you consider the best strategy for the party now to grow?
This is what you're talking about is obviously a big risk. There is no reason to believe in any way that the Red Party and our MPs should be vaccinated against the type of thing that happens to any people that become professional politicians. Over time, obviously, if the same people just sit in the same positions for years and years and years, you will obviously have the same kind of problems in the Red Party that you had in other leftist parties. But there are some ways to battle this, of course. One thing is strengthening the organization, making it a top priority to build and organize the different local chapters of the Red Party, to use the money we earn by being elected to the parliament to build the Red Party also outside the parliament, so that you have a strong organization demanding things, supplying you with information, with proposals and so on. The second is how we organize the group of MPs. For instance, the Red Party has been very strict on wages for its politicians, not wanting our politicians to make 1 million kroners, 15 million Icelandic a year, not wanting our politicians to have all these crazy benefits that other politicians in parliament have, but also that we demand of our MPs that they travel around, meet ordinary organizations, ordinary people, and of course the local chapters of the Red Party. So it's not an easy fix, and it's a big risk, and it will obviously be a problem in any party of growing at this rate. But it's necessary to always make sure that the body of the party is not too small or the head of the party is too big. So it's necessary to build the organization at the same rate as you build your electoral success. And that's difficult because you can't govern the electorate. So if they want to vote for us because we're doing a good job, it's not like we want to say, no, thank you, this is going too fast. But at the same time, it's very necessary to have a priority, main priority of building the organization. And I can just say for my own part of the country, Rogaland, It's a part of the West Norway, and it's traditionally always been the weakest county of the Red Party. And it's a really people there are majority there is very right wing, but the Red Party has grown extremely fast and is in a and has been able to elect me to parliament, and that's fantastic. But we're also in a very dangerous position because almost every single member there is new. And the only reason they become a member of the Red Party is to elect me to parliament. Not the only reason, but this is a main reason of the organization, of the activity, of the things we have done. So what the question is now, what do we do with all these hundreds of people that are now a membership of the Red Party in Rogaland, or even more so, what the thousands of people that voted for us in Rogaland? What do we do with all these people to activate them to become a part of the party and not just a part of some kind of election campaign, which is obviously a risk. So these are things we're working with, but I'm not sure there's any quick fix other than working hard on it every single day, actually.
Yeah. There is no quick fix. I mean, in my experience working here as a leader, if you call it that, for the local Red Party, what I find is that it's difficult to activate even the members, even the people who have come so far that they have become members of Red, to get them to work within the party actively is a difficult thing, and maybe there is something in this generation shift from people like us who entered politics on maybe a more theoretical basis. We had at least a theoretical foundation towards what some people say that younger generation today, they go for issues. They go for environment, they go for this, and they go for that, and without a cohesive kind of idea about how the structure hangs together. So obviously there is a lot of educational work to be done by the party. But let's jump from one thing to another, and let's not make life easy, you know. Today, the capital system is organized globally and has its own institutions and rules to follow, which nation states have to follow. Via the WTO, the World Trade Organization, they have GATS and TISA and TTIP and so on. For many, as I see it, for right-wing politicians, this just makes life easier. You know, they can always refer, no, we cannot do that. The computer says, you know, that kind of phrase. But how can a national party like the Red, even if it continues to grow, and as you say, you get a majority, 51%, hope to uproot the capital system and achieve socialism without international alliances and cooperations? So where do they, what are your thoughts? Where do the left-wing socialist party of today stand in that respect?
That's a very good question. I think that the notion of sort of socialism in one country, I think it's a hopeless notion. And at the same time, I think it's politics still in the world are practiced on a national level for the most part. So the struggles you fight at any time will be at the national level, and building and having national success is also the precursor of having international success. So by strengthening the left party, for instance, the Red Party in Norway, you will be able to inspire people in other countries. We have learned a lot from our Danish counterparts, Enhedslisten, and similarly, I think there's no one who is in doubt that the Bernie Sanders movement and every single part of that broad coalition with people very far to the left as well has been extremely inspiring for people in all countries of the world and for the left all over the world. So the national struggles and fights are not sort of in opposition to the international idea of socialism. But I think it's necessary that you to try to build international connections on a broader basis than today. In the old days, the problem was that you had the Socialist International and after it, the Communist International. And the problem today is that a lot of these new radical socialist parties, for instance, the Red Party, are very, very, very careful with having sort of sister parties in other countries. And the reason for that is historical mistakes of the 70s, believing in all kinds of crazy things in China and even in Cambodia and whatnot. So we have now maybe an exaggerated carefulness talking to other parties in other parts of the world, because you don't want to sort of get mixed up in anything that turns out to actually be wrong, that you don't control or you don't know anything about. But I don't think there is any way to proceed with sort of fighting, for instance, the European Union without or it's the market liberal policies, without combining these two strategies. That you both need a national struggle to protect your national democracy against the right-wing policies of Brussels, but you also need some kind of cooperation on an EU level to reform the EU. So we're working on for the most part, on the first thing, but it's important for us now after the election, when we have a stronger base, to try to make contact with more political parties and more political forces in Europe that we haven't been able to prioritize as much before we had our big breakthrough election now.
Mm-hmm. If we look at the situation in Scandinavia, you have Enhedslisten in Denmark, which was the small party on the left, Socialistisk SF in Denmark. When Socialistisk Folkeparti, when they went into government, that was a turning point for Enhedslisten. So from then on, they continued to grow. And Red in Norway has had the policy now to stay out of government. Do you see in the coming future that the Red would be going into government, and on what kind of conditions might that participation be?
First of all, that's a very good question. First of all, I think that it would be unwise to have sort of to make some kind of ideological doctrine which says that we will never enter government anytime, any place, or we refuse to cooperate with any kind of party other than ourselves in government, or that sort of thing. Even though one has to remember that Arbeiderpartiet, the Social Democratic Party, that was their precise line. They could never govern with anyone else. And that was their line for many years. And they didn't want to enter government before they had some kind of support, but their own one-party government. But what I think is, it's a question about the strength. So if you enter government with 4.7% of the vote, and you're a rather new party, it's grown rather quickly, and you want to go in and you want to see what happens, you're going to be squashed. So I think that the Red Party has to have a whole different type of electoral support and a whole different type of organizational support to be able to go into a government. And one obvious condition in the Norwegian context is that this government has to be able to not only challenge, but also to quit the EES, the European Economic Zone. And if you don't do that, the same government will just be tied on hands and feet by neoliberal policies from the European Union and Brussels. So this is sort of I would say that's the one obvious condition, but it's also a discussion we've had. Rather left-wing governments in Norway, if you look at the parties, that haven't been able even to turn the tide coming to growing inequality. So during the last red-green government of Norway, when also the Socialist Left Party was a part of the government, the inequalities grew between poor and rich every single year. So it's obviously very difficult to turn a lot of these things around. And I don't think it's right for a radical socialist party to enter this sort of government if you're not realistically able to change the direction of society in some sort of positive way. And I would believe today and for many years forward, Rødt's best position is to be free on the outside of a government, being, of course, support for a government hindering that the right is able to rule in Norway, but at the same time pressing this government from the left all the way. I think this is the right way to go for the foreseeable future. And then there are two things that can change this. One is the electoral support. It's obvious that if Rødt suddenly has 20-30% of the vote, there will be a big expectation also among the voters, among our people, that we should be able to do something about this vote, not just be on the outside and point on other people. This is a dilemma, but it will come if we grow. And the second discussion is if we are moving into a more acute form of capitalist crisis, which is not present in Norway right now. But if you're suddenly in a situation where there is a need of stopping a more radical right-wing onslaught than today, then I think also there's a discussion that you could argue that you could be a part of sort of a people's front type of government defensively to stop a crisis. But none of these conditions are present. We don't have 20% of the vote, and Norwegian democracy is not crumbling tomorrow. So I'm not really sure there will be any use of the Red Party entering government now, other than losing a lot of support and being forced to support a lot of policies that you really don't want to have. And we could also add there is no single party in parliament that wants us in government. So it's not just a question of what we want to do. It's also a question of the political line of the other parties.
Yeah. Well, this has been very interesting. There are plenty of things to continue discussing, but if we end on this note on international cooperation, if we look at, for example, on cooperation between the left-wing parties in Scandinavia, if we take Iceland, Denmark, and Norway, there is no danger of these parties ending up in the same situation as when Moscow was dictating the line. And I'm sure there could be a lot of support which these parties could give to each other. Can you foresee, does Rødt or Red have the capacity to cooperate with, for example, if we just limit us to Iceland and Denmark, with the left-wing parties there? And what sort of cooperation would be the most fruitful, you think?
Yeah, I've thought about that a bit. We have a strong relationship with Enhedslisten and have had for several years, actually, in Denmark. But we've not had this much contact with Sosialistflokken. And I think it would be natural for the Red Party in Norway to be to try to start the process of making a more regular cooperation with the Sosialistflokken, and also trying to include Enhedslisten in that work. And then, of course, there is this Enhedslisten has this problem there. They have two sister parties in every country. There's sister party both of the Socialist Left Party and of the Red Party in Norway. And we are both of the Venstre Party in Sweden. And then I would think that Enhedslisten are both a sister party of Venstre Greinir and of Sosialistflokken. But I think it's necessary now that you've got the political situation in Iceland and this new forming Sosialistflokken, that would be natural for the Red Party to take initiative to have a bigger sort of exchange of experiences. And we should obviously invite people from Sosialistflokken here to visit us in the parliament and so on, and also go on a study trip to Iceland for the same purposes. And a lot of the struggles between Norway and Iceland are very similar. A lot of the struggles about natural resources, people and common ownership of natural resources are very similar from Iceland to Norway. So in these discussions, and we are both a part of the European Economic Zone, so both of these, so these two countries are extremely closely linked in a part of the more acute fights we're struggling with in Norway right now. So we're trying to accomplish that in some form, I think, during this before the summer at least.
Okay. Should we end this discussion on this note then? Thank you very much, Mímir Kristjánsson. And we continue the struggle.
We do.
Yes.
We do.